You want to own a medieval jousting tournament. In your head, it's simple. 2 knights on destriers, lances leveled, 40,000 pounds of horse and armor meeting at the gallop while a crowd roars from tiered wooden stands, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, coins rolling steadily into your purse. That part's true. The crowd is real. The roar is real. What you probably didn't picture is that the most valuable thing in the entire arena isn't the spectacle. It's the horse underneath one of those knights, and whoever controls the right to capture it controls the whole industry. This is what it actually cost to get into the tournament business at 3 distinct levels, from organizing a local hastelud on borrowed land to staging a royal round table for a king. Where the money came from, which stream carried the most weight, and why the real engine of this business had almost nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with a secondary market in military hardware running quietly underneath the spectacle like a pawnshop hidden inside a theater. And why a business built on something as reliable as aristocratic vanity still bankrupted its organizers regularly. The prize is the horse, not the fight. There were 3 real ways into this trade, and the gap between them isn't measured in prestige. It's measured in who holds the license. At the bottom sat the village hastelud, or local melee, small enough to organize without a royal charter and cheap enough that a minor lord with decent land could attempt one. Entry cost you the use of a flat field, the construction of basic wooden barriers called the lists, and enough notice to attract a dozen knights from the surrounding region. Contemporary account books suggest basic list construction, timber posts, rope barriers, a viewing platform of any ambition, ran to somewhere between 10 and 30 shillings for a modest event. A herald, mandatory for authenticating lineage and managing the order of entry, added another few shillings in fees. You charged spectators on the gate, a penny or 2 for common folk standing in the field, 6 pence to a shilling for anyone wanting a seat with a clear line of sight. The knights themselves paid an entry fee, typically 1 to 5 shillings depending on the prize structure you advertised. At this level you were covering costs, not building wealth. The economics were thin and the legal exposure was substantial, because without a royal license, every organizer in England from roughly 1194 onward was running a technically illegal event. That licensing system is where the cost structure changes entirely. In 1194, Richard I issued a charter establishing 5 designated tournament sites across England: Brackley, Kenilworth, Blyth, Stamford and Salisbury. Participation at those licensed sites required a fee paid directly to the crown, graduated by rank. An earl paid 20 marks, a baron 10, a landed knight 4, a landless knight 2. Those aren't gate receipts. They're regulatory entry costs paid before a single lance is broken. Getting into this tier meant either organizing within the license system, paying the crown's cut on every event, or operating outside it and risking confiscation of your equipment and a fine that could dwarf your entire projected revenue. At the very top sat the royal tournament. The entry cost here wasn't measured in shillings or marks at all. It was a statement of political power delivered through organized spectacle. Edward III spent what contemporary household records suggest was upward of £100 on prizes and gifts for the Windsor Round Table Tournament of 1344, a figure that represented roughly the annual wages of 15 skilled craftsmen. The tournament at Smithfield in 1390, organized under Richard II, drew knights from France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. That scale of event required months of advanced logistics. Letter carriers dispatched across Europe, heralds sent to foreign courts to issue formal challenges, pavilions constructed, horses stabled and fed, officials appointed, and a prize structure announced far enough in advance that foreign competitors could plan a journey measured in weeks. Entry into this tier didn't require money first. It required proximity to a crown that wanted the propaganda value of winning. Now, 3 things nobody tells you before you commit to any of this. First, your core product spoils faster than ale. A tournament's entire commercial value exists in the window between the moment the challenge is issued and the moment the last lance splinters. Whether plague, a political crisis, or a royal summons pulling your primary competitors to war could collapse that window to nothing with no advance notice and no refund mechanism. Second, the Church had formal theological objections to the entire enterprise for nearly 2 centuries. The Council of Clermont banned tournaments in 1130. Pope Eugenius III renewed that ban in 1148. Innocent III prohibited them again at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. Banned competitors could be denied Christian burial, which functioned less like a spiritual threat and more like a social and legal liability, since family inheritance could be contested when a man died outside the Church's recognized structures. Third, your biggest operating cost wasn't labor, equipment, or the prize purse. It was the destria. A trained tournament warhorse in 13th century England cost between £40 and £80. That's the number worth holding on to, £40 to £80 per horse. A skilled craftsman in the same period earned roughly £2 to £4 a year. The destrier is worth 2 decades of someone else's labor, walking around on 4 legs in your arena, and in this industry, the destrier is not just the spectacle. The destrier is the currency. So where did the money in a business like this actually come from? The answer breaks into 3 parts, and none of them work independently. Squeeze any one of them and the other 2 lose their footing. The first is the gate, and it's the one everyone assumes is primary. At a major tournament in 13th or 14th century England, the crowd paying entry fees represented genuine revenue. Common spectators at a penny to 2 pence each, wealthier attendees paying for reserved positions with clear sightlines. Estimates based on crowd size references in chronicles put major English events at several thousand spectators for prominent tournaments, with royal events drawing larger numbers. But gate revenue had a ceiling determined entirely by the capacity of wooden infrastructure that cost money to build, was destroyed by weather and by the force of a crowd, and had to be rebuilt for each event. Gate revenue, in a business where your construction costs reset to zero every tournament, is the stream that looks largest from the outside and carries the thinnest margin per pound of effort when you actually run the accounting. The marshal of the lists, the official responsible for managing crowd access, was a fixed cost of doing business, not a courtesy. His fee reduced what you kept from the gate before the last spectator had filed out. The second is patronage, and this one runs in the opposite direction of what you'd expect. The organizing lord didn't just collect money. He spent it, aggressively and on purpose, and the return wasn't measured in shillings at all. It was measured in political leverage. Hosting a tournament of sufficient prestige meant attracting knights from across the region, or across Europe at the highest tier, which meant attracting the nobility who followed those knights, which meant a temporary concentration of aristocratic decision-makers in your hall, at your tables, watching your heralds conduct your event under your authority. The spending was the signal. A lord who could absorb £100 in tournament costs and prizes without visible strain was demonstrating a financial and administrative capacity that was itself a political argument. This is what makes the tournament business genuinely unlike any other medieval enterprise. The expenditure was the product, in a way that has no clean parallel in brewing or wool trading or any trade built on cost minimization. The prize is the horse, not the fight, and in the patronage model, the prize isn't even the horse. It's the room full of powerful men who watched you give the horse away. The third is the one that actually generated transferable wealth for the competitors inside the lists, the one that built fortunes. The ransom and capture economy. In the melee format of early tournaments, a knight who unhorsed or subdued a competitor claimed the competitor's horse and armor as a prize. A destrier at £40 to £80. A full suit of plate armor by the mid-14th century at £16 to £30. Hauberks, chanfrons, weapons, all recoverable and resaleable. This was not a secondary consideration. This was the primary financial engine for the professional tournament competitor, and it functioned as a liquid secondary market in military hardware so reliable that it supported careers spanning decades. The most documented example in the historical record is William Marshal, whose career was reconstructed in extraordinary detail by his biographer in the Histoire de Guillaume le Maréchal, written shortly after his death in 1219. In a single tournament season, Marshal is recorded capturing 103 knights. Each capture meant a horse or armor or a negotiated ransom payment in lieu. His tournament earnings funded the purchase of lands and the establishment of a lineage. He died as the Earl of Pembroke and Regent of England. He started as a younger son with no inheritance and a warhorse. For the tournament organizer, not the competitor, the capture economy created a structural dependency worth understanding exactly. Your event's prestige was determined by the quality of competitors it attracted. The quality of competitors was determined by the prize structure you advertised and the density of opponents worth fighting. A tournament that attracted skilled, well-mounted knights attracted more skilled, well-mounted knights the following year, because the ransom economy meant that the location of strong opponents was itself the prize. An event that attracted weak fields drew weaker competitors. This compounded in both directions. The best-run events became self-reinforcing. The rest competed on entry fees and gate revenue alone, which put them permanently in the thin margin category. Here is exactly how the money moved in a single melee capture. A knight enters your lists, paying his entry fee of 2 to 4 shillings. He competes, unhorsing a rival. Under the accepted laws of arms for that format, he claims the rival's destrier and armor as prize. The rival's destrier is worth £40. The rival's armor, a partial harness of plate with a hauberked midsection, is worth another £12 to £18. The total haul from a single successful engagement exceeds what most English households spent on food and fuel across an entire year. Now the rival has a choice: surrender the equipment immediately, or negotiate a ransom in coin. Ransoms were routinely set at the assessed market value of the equipment in question, payable within a fixed term, sometimes backed by a formal bond or recognizance lodged with a third party, a legal instrument. The herald who managed the capture record charged a fee to certify the assessment. The organizer of the event charged a fee to provide the forum in which the dispute, if any, was resolved. The captured equipment, if surrendered directly, was resold at the nearest market within weeks. A destrier trained for tournament combat was not difficult to resell. The buyers were the knights who had just watched it perform in the lists. The horse moved through a resale market so predictable it functioned as a commodity exchange dressed in ceremonial cloth. That's 3 revenue streams: gate, patronage, and the ransom economy. The connection between them is the destrier. Without the horse and the prize structure, the ransom economy collapses. Without the ransom economy, professional competitors lose their primary financial incentive to travel. Without the professional competitor's patronage loses its prestige value. Without the prestige, the gate empties, because the crowd came to see someone worth watching. Every part of this runs through the same 40 to 80 pound animal. What does the history of this industry actually tell you about who survived and who didn't? The documented record isn't a single clean company story, because medieval tournament enterprise wasn't incorporated in any modern sense. But the pattern of survival is legible across several generations of evidence. The pas d'armes of the 14th and 15th centuries, in which a single knight or small group held a designated passage against all challengers for a fixed period, produced the most concentrated financial risk and reward of any tournament format. The holder advertised the event, bore the infrastructure costs, attracted the challengers, and then stood in the lists himself. If he won consistently, he collected horses and ransoms against the initial outlay. If he was badly outmatched in the early rounds, he lost equipment, credibility, and the costs he'd already committed. Jacques de Laloing, a Burgundian knight whose career in the mid-15th century was documented in the Livre de Fête du Bon Chevalier Messire Jacques de Laloing, held a pas d'armes called the Fountain of Tears for 3 years beginning in 1449. He traveled across Burgundy, Scotland, Portugal, and Spain challenging opponents under formal rules of his own design. His record, by the Chronicle's account, was effectively unbroken until his death at age 32. That career produced land, gifts from noble sponsors, and a documented reputation that drew patrons across Western Europe. It was also entirely dependent on his continued physical capacity to win. The moment he stopped winning, every revenue stream terminated simultaneously. That's the structural fragility at the heart of the competitor model, a single point of failure located inside a human body. The tournament organizer who survived that fragility was the one who separated the event from the competitor, who built a recurring, predictable event calendar that didn't depend on any single night's performance or presence. The heralds understood this earlier than almost anyone else in the industry. The College of Heralds in England, granted its first royal incorporation in 1484 under Richard III, had been operating as a functional professional body for well over a century before that formalization. Heralds authenticated lineage, managed the order of entry, arbitrated disputes over captured equipment, recorded the results, and traveled with the event calendar the way modern promoters travel with a touring act. Their fee for authenticating a participant's right to compete, verifying that a claimant was genuinely of gentle birth, was a fixed cost per entry paid before the competition began. In periods when tournament participation expanded to include ambitious men of uncertain lineage, the herald's gatekeeping function became more commercially valuable, not less. A herald's income was spread across every event in a region's calendar. A knight's income was concentrated in his own performance at each individual event. A tournament organizer's income was concentrated in a single date that weather, political upheaval, or a competitor's injury could erase. The heralds outlasted almost everyone else in this industry because they owned the credential that made the event legible, and credentials do not take injury. If this trade had a structural maxim, it would be this: own the authentication, not the arena. What separated the operations that survived from those that failed? Not the prize structure. Not the quality of the lists. Not even the prestige of the competitors, though that mattered. 3 things, consistently. It works when the event is calendared far enough in advance that competitors can plan travel and logistics without personal financial exposure to last-minute cancellation. It works when the patronage relationship is with an institution, a crown or a major noble house, rather than a single person whose political fortunes could reverse between the announcement and the event date. It works when the ransom economy is formalized enough that disputes over captured equipment are adjudicated by a recognized authority before the winner leaves the field, because a disputed ransom claim that drags through informal negotiation for months is a receivable, not revenue. The operations that failed were typically running a reversed version of all three, announced late, dependent on a single patron's continued goodwill, and running an informal capture economy where every disputed horse became a legal liability that outlasted the event by years. The invisible cost, the one that never appears in a naive accounting of tournament revenue, is the cost of the disputed claim. When a knight captured a horse or demanded a ransom and the defeated party contested it, claiming the capture was invalid or the equipment belonged to a third party or the rules of the specific event didn't permit that type of capture, the organizer bore the administrative burden of resolution. That burden didn't have a line item. It showed up instead as the time, relationship capital, and legal exposure of whoever had agreed to host the event and put their name on the charter. Underneath the disputed claim problem sat a second invisible cost most organizers absorbed without ever naming it: the advance provisioning obligation. A tournament that advertised prizes had to be prepared to award them. A destrier promised as first prize had to be stabled, fed, and physically available on the day of the event. Stabling costs for a single warhorse ran to several pence a day. A multi-day event with a full prize stable could spend more on horse feed than on herald fees before a single competitor arrived. Add to that the construction cost of temporary barriers, the lists themselves repaired or rebuilt each season, and the diplomatic cost of correspondence with foreign competitors who expected their travel to be underwritten or at minimum compensated for when events were cancelled. A cancelled tournament didn't simply produce zero revenue. It produced negative revenue in the form of outstanding commitments to guests who had already traveled, supplies already purchased, and heralds already retained. The operations that outlasted their organizers understood that the tournament's economics were not primarily about what happened on the day of the event. They were about everything committed to before the first lance ran, and everything owed to participants after the last one splintered. If you'd done everything correctly, what does this business look like in numbers you can actually evaluate? Scenario 1. The local hastalood. You are a minor lord with a suitable field, an existing relationship with a herald willing to authenticate entries, and enough regional reputation to attract 15 to 20 knights. Your construction costs for the lists run 20 to 40 shillings. Herald fees add another 10 shillings. You charge 2 pence gate entry to an audience of 500 spectators, which is roughly £4 to £5 in gate receipts on a good day. Night entry fees at 2 shillings each from 18 entrants add another 36 shillings. Total gross revenue in the range of £6 to £7. Against costs of 30 to 50 shillings, you are running a margin of roughly £4 to £5, if nothing goes wrong. One rained-out event before gate receipts are collected, or one serious injury generating a disputed liability, and you are spending next year's tournament budget settling this year's claim. This is the medieval equivalent of a single-screen cinema in a small market. The business works while it works, and it works on almost no margin for error. Scenario 2. The licensed regional circuit. You are operating within Richard I license framework, which means you have access to designated sites with existing infrastructure, a meaningful reduction in per-event construction cost, but you are paying the Crown's tithe on every event, which runs to several marks per license tournament depending on the participant pool. At this level, your gate revenue scales. A well-publicized event at a recognized site can draw 2,000 to 3,000 spectators, putting gate receipts in the range of £15 to £25 per event. Patronage supplements this with gifts, hospitality contributions, and the political leverage that makes the costs themselves worthwhile. A knight like William Marshall, operating in this tier, is not generating his wealth from gate revenue at all. He is running a ransom and capture operation inside a licensed venue, and the organizer's cut of that secondary market, in the form of the event fee charged per entry, is the most predictable revenue the organizer sees. The prize is the horse, not the fight, and the organizer who understands this charges entry fees calibrated to the expected ransom value in play, not to the size of the gate. Scenario 3. The royal spectacle. You are Edward III, and the tournament at Windsor in 1344 is a statement, not a revenue event. The £100+ in documented prize expenditure is not a loss. It is the cheapest political advertisement available to a crown that needs to demonstrate military seriousness, attract foreign allies, and consolidate domestic loyalty simultaneously. The return is measured in the quality of the alliances the event generates and in the propaganda value of a king seen to be generous, powerful, and ceremonially sophisticated at exactly the right political moment. This scenario doesn't have a payback period in any conventional sense. It has a foreign policy dividend that shows up in subsequent decades of diplomatic correspondence, and the cost is underwritten by a treasury that can absorb it as a line item in a governance budget. Put all three scenarios next to each other and the formula for this business becomes legible. Tournament revenue equals gate plus patronage plus entry fees, all of it multiplied by the frequency with which you can run a credible event, then subtracted against construction, herald fees, prize costs, legal exposure, and the crown's licensing cut. Every variable in that formula, except the gate, is controlled by someone other than the organizer. The crown controls the license. The heralds control the authentication. The knights control the prestige by choosing which events are worth their travel costs. The weather controls the date. You control the field, the lists, and the exposure. That's the real shape of this business. The operations that ran longest weren't the most spectacular. They were the ones that understood where they sat in a system whose actual power was held by the herald with the credential, the crown with the license, and the warhorse in the stable. Everything else, the crowd, the noise, the splintering lances, the stands going up every season, that was the product someone else was selling. You were providing the field it happened in. So you wanted to own a medieval jousting tournament. There are 2 lances in the ground, a crowd that came from 3 counties, and the most valuable thing in the entire arena is standing in a temporary stable on the far end of your field with a feed cost that would embarrass a smaller household. Somebody is about to take it home tonight. It might be your competitor. It might be the man he beats. The one person with a near certain claim on the day's proceeds is the herald in the corner, who authenticated every entry this morning and will be paid before the first horse runs. You provided the land and the lists and the license. The prize is the horse, not the fight, and the horse was never really yours to begin with.